What's the price of a soul? For Leo, it was exactly 300 talent. Flat broke, he flew to Mexico to inherit his dying grandmother's villa. His plan was simple. Play the grandson for 3 months, get the deed, and sell. Easy money. But the villa was a tiny, faded house, and his grandmother, Esperanza, wasn't a frail old woman. She was a radiant teacher hiding a lifetime of secrets. Soon, he was in a war with his greedy aunt for a property worth less than he dreamed. He came for a quick fortune. He stayed for a family, a home, and a love that would change everything. Disclaimer: this channel features fictional psychological stories created for emotional exploration and storytelling purposes. All characters and events are fictional. The cheap coffee machine whirred, and the smell of old bread stuck to Leo's jacket, but nothing could drown out the sound that made him want to throw his phone against the wall. Ting, ting, ting. One message after another, like tiny needles poking at his temples. A text from the bank. Your credit card has been temporarily suspended due to late payment. One from his landlord. Final reminder for this month's rent. Another from an unknown number, probably another loan shark. Leo let out a long, heavy sigh and dropped his head onto the sticky plastic table. The cheap suit he'd worn to work, the sales job that had vanished that very morning, now felt tight and itchy against his skin. His boss hadn't wanted to hear any apologies. One big contract, Leo had entered the wrong numbers and everything fell apart like a sandcastle. Useless! The man had shouted in front of everyone. The word just kept echoing in Leo's head. He stared out the cafe window at the city, hustling through a gloomy afternoon. 28 years old, flat broke, a mountain of debt, and a sour, empty feeling churning in his gut. All he could think about was money. He needed money, a lot of it, a miracle, anything to pull him out of this deep, dark hole. His phone rang, cutting through his miserable thoughts. An international number. Leo frowned, thinking it was another scam, but he was desperate enough to answer. Hello? Am I speaking with Leonardo Gonzalez? This is attorney Javier Rivera, calling from Oaxaca, Mexico. The voice was warm and formal. Leo answered coldly. Speaking. What is this about? I'm calling regarding your grandmother, Esperanza Gonzalez. Her health is very serious. She is in the late stages of a cancer and needs family to care for her. Leo blinked. Grandma Esperanza. A faint name from the past, a blurry face from childhood memories. His mother had left Mexico when he was little, and they never went back. 20 years. He'd practically forgotten her. And, Leo asked, his voice flat. Attorney Rivera continued, like he was reading a contract clause. According to your grandmother's wishes and the terms of her will, if you agree to come to Oaxaca to care for her in her final months, the full ownership of her estate, primarily her home here, will be transferred to you. A spark lit up behind Leo's eyes. The house? What's it worth? It's a long-held family property. I can send you some pictures and a preliminary valuation. A message with a file popped up on his screen. Leo opened it. It was a distant photo of a yellow colonial-style house, looking fairly spacious, on a tree-lined lot. Underneath was a line of text. Estimated value, 300,000. 500,000. Leo's heart jumped into his throat. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. That number wiped away all the worries about debt, about getting fired, about his fuzzy future. It even blurred the image of the sick grandmother he'd never really known. The corner of his mouth twisted into a dry, cold smile. This wasn't a family invitation. This was a business deal. It looked like luck was finally smiling on him. "A fair trade," Leo said, his voice quick and decisive. "I agree. I'll be there." 2 days later, Leo was on a flight to Mexico. In his fake designer suitcase were clothes and a laptop, which held a file with his plan. 1. Take care of Grandma, bare minimum. 2. Get the ownership papers. 3. Contact a real estate agent to sell immediately. Estimated time, 3 months. He spent most of the flight scrolling online, looking at real estate prices in Oaxaca, his eyes gleaming every time he saw a nice house listed for a high price. The image of the yellow house from the lawyer's photo filled his head, turning into glowing green numbers in his future bank account. When the taxi from the airport drove him into the town of Oaxaca and then turned onto smaller and smaller streets, Leo was still buzzing with excitement. The colorful scenery, strange sounds, and unfamiliar smells passed by the window, but he barely noticed. He was just impatient to see his property. The taxi stopped at the mouth of a narrow alley, paved with cobblestones, too small for the car to enter. "Senora Esperanza's house is at the end of that alley," the driver said, pointing. Leo grabbed his suitcase and stepped out, full of anticipation. He walked down the winding alley, past mossy walls and the sound of laughter drifting from inner courtyards. And then he stopped dead. In front of him was not the spacious, elegant colonial villa from the photo. It was a small, pretty wooden house, but it was old and worn, its paint a faded blue. The red roof tiles were covered in moss. It sat modestly between 2 other houses, with a tiny front yard packed with bright orange-yellow flowers he didn't recognize. Leo's face went pale. His hand went slack, and the suitcase hit the cobblestones with a thud. He stared dumbly at his phone, comparing the photo to the reality in front of him. The photo had been taken from a distance, at a clever angle that made the house look bigger and more isolated. But this was just a normal old person's small home. A wave of anger and disappointment washed over him. Where was the money? Where was the value? "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice choked and bitter. "Was I tricked? How much is this old place even worth?" His final business deal, his last bit of hope, had suddenly shattered into a mess of old wood and strange flowers. He stood there, in the unfamiliar alley, with one sour question spinning in his mind. Was 3 months of taking care of a dying grandmother really worth trading for this? Before Leo could even lift his suitcase, the faded blue door of the little house creaked open. A woman stood there, small and thin as a bird. A bright purple scarf was wrapped tightly around her head. Her face was lined, her skin pale, but her eyes were huge and dark and sparkling, like 2 pieces of polished obsidian. And she was smiling. It wasn't a weak, sick person's smile. It was a full, warm, sunshine, bright smile that reached all the way to her eyes and made the lines around them crinkle. Leo froze, his hand still on the suitcase handle. This was not the frail, dying woman he'd pictured. She was radiant. "Mi pequeño sol," she said, her voice a low, warm hum that reminded him of distant cello music. My little son, you finally came home." Before he could process the words or the strange, beautiful nickname, she moved forward and wrapped her arms around him. She was so small her head barely reached his chest. The hug was firm and sure. Leo stiffened, his arms hanging awkwardly at his sides. He hadn't been hugged like this in years. It felt like being enveloped in a warm blanket he'd forgotten existed. He smelled lavender and something like cinnamon on her scarf. She pulled back, away, still holding his arms, and looked up at him. She didn't mention the cancer. She didn't mention the will. She just chuckled, a soft, hiccuping sound. "Look at you, all grown. You have your mother's nose. Come inside. You must be tired from your journey." She took his suitcase as if it weighed nothing and wheeled it inside, chattering in a mix of Spanish and English. The inside of the house was a surprise, too. It was small and cluttered, but not dirty. Colorful, woven blankets were thrown over chairs. Photographs in simple frames covered the walls. Pots of those same orange-yellow flowers sat on the windowsills, catching the afternoon light. The air smelled of herbs and wood polish. "This is my garden," she said, leading him through the house to a back door. "My little piece of the world." The backyard was a wild, beautiful chaos. It wasn't a lawn. It was a tapestry of plants. Tomatoes climbed trellises. Bushes with dark green leaves huddled together. And everywhere, in pots and in the ground, were explosions of those golden orange flowers. They glowed like little flames. As she pointed out a basil plant, her phone, an old flip model, rang from her apron pocket. Her smile faded just a little. "Un momento, mi sol." She walked a few paces away, towards a crooked lemon tree. Leo pretended to examine a strange-looking pepper, but his ears strained. "Si, Rosa, si." "I'm fine," she said, her voice dropping, losing its musical quality. "No, no te preocupes. Don't worry. I have Leo here now. Yes, he's here. The will?" She paused, and Leo saw her shoulders tense slightly under her simple dress. "I will think about it. We will talk later. Adios." She hung up and turned back, the sunny smile back in place, but Leo had seen the crack. Rosa. Who was Rosa? And what about the will? Was there another one? A cold trickle, different from his earlier anger, started in his stomach. This wasn't just about a house. There were other players. That evening, after a simple, delicious meal of something she called sopa de tortilla that warmed him from the inside out, she brought out a small box. From it, she pulled a book. It wasn't a new notebook. It was old, with a cover made of soft, worn leather. On the front was a delicate carving of a flower, one of the orange-yellow ones from the garden. She placed it gently in his hands. The leather felt warm and alive. "For you," she said, her dark eyes serious now. "I want you to write in this. Every day I will teach you something. A saying from here. How to make a real mole sauce. The name of a flower. So that later you will have a place to remember." Leo stared at the book. It felt heavy, but not with physical weight. It felt heavy with meaning. He looked from the book to her hands resting on the table. They were thin, the skin papery, and covered in brown age spots and little scars from a lifetime of work. These hands had cooked that meal. These hands had planted that garden. They were nothing like the cool, manicured hands of the lawyers and bosses he knew. For the first time since he'd agreed to this deal, the clear, sharp plan in his head, care, get papers, sell, wavered. It blurred, like a reflection in a pond someone had touched. He wasn't just taking from a sick old lady. She was trying to give him something, and it wasn't just the house. He swallowed, his throat suddenly tight. He couldn't look her in the eye. He looked down at the carved flower on the diary instead. "Thank you, abuela," he mumbled, a Spanish word for grandmother feeling foreign and thick on his tongue. He hadn't called anyone that since he was a child. Just then, the front door swung open without a knock. A woman swept in. She was in her 40s, dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking cream-colored pantsuit. Her perfume hit Leo first, a strong, floral cloud that clashed violently with the smells of herbs and wood in the house. She carried a fancy woven basket full of packaged cookies and fruits. "Mama!" the woman trilled, setting the basket down and enveloping Esperanza in a loud, dramatic hug. She kissed the air next of her mother's cheeks. But her eyes, sharp and calculating, were already scanning the room, flicking over the furniture, the pictures, taking inventory. Then they landed on Leo, sitting at the table with the leather book in his hands. Her hug with Esperanza ended, and she straightened up, a slick, polished smile spreading across her face. It didn't reach her cold, evaluating eyes. "And this must be Leo," she said, her voice sweet but with a metallic edge. "All the way from the United States. I'm your Tia Rosa, your mother's sister." She took a few steps closer, her high heels clicking on the tile floor. She looked him up and down, from his old sneakers to his rumpled shirt. "I heard things have been a little difficult for you up there. No job? Lots of bills?" Her smile stayed, but her eyes were like two dark stones. Leo's grip tightened on the diary. The warm, confused feeling in his chest vanished, replaced by a familiar, cold alertness. This was no friendly aunt. This was competition. Rosa had arrived, and the game for Grandma Esperanza's house and her heart had just become a lot more complicated. The little kitchen was a war zone, and Leo was losing. Badly. Bowls and little clay dishes covered every surface, each holding something different. Dark red chiles, tan sesame seeds, a piece of bitter chocolate, almonds, raisins, cinnamon sticks. It looked less like cooking and more like a crazy science experiment. "This is mole," Abuela Esperanza had said with a proud smile, as if introducing a dear friend. "Not from a jar. Real mole. Today you learn." Leo's job was to toast the dried chiles in a pan. "Just until you smell them, not see smoke," she instructed. He was trying to focus, but his mind was still on that leather diary in his room and the sharp look in Tia Rosa's eyes. He shook the pan too hard. A cloud of fine, rust-colored chile powder puffed up directly into his face. Leo stumbled back, his eyes and nose burning like fire. He dropped the pan with a clatter, sending the chiles skittering across the floor. A coughing fit seized him, deep and racking, doubling him over. Tears streamed from his stinging eyes. Frustration, hot and sudden, boiled over. This was stupid. All of it. "Why does it have to be so complicated?" he snapped, his voice rough from coughing. He waved a hand at the chaotic counter. "Who has time for this? Why don't we just buy something, order takeout?" The words hung in the spicy air. He expected her to be hurt or angry. Abuela Esperanza didn't say anything. She just knelt down, slowly and carefully, on the tile floor. With her thin, spotted hands, she began picking up the spilled chiles, one by one, brushing them off. The silence was heavy, filled only with the sound of Leo's ragged breathing. When she spoke, her voice was so soft it was almost part of the quiet. Because, as the flavor of patience, she said, placing the rescued chiles back into a bowl, is what feeds the soul, mijo. She stood up and handed him the bowl. Her dark eyes held no judgment, just a deep, quiet knowing. Leo's anger fizzled, replaced by a hot wave of shame. He took the bowl, his fingers brushing hers. "Sorry," he mumbled, looking at the floor. As the sauce, now carefully tended by Abuela, simmered in a deep pot, filling the house with a rich, unbelievable smell of chocolate, earth, and spice, she began to talk. She told him about the fiestas of her youth, the whole town alive with music and paper lanterns. "I met your abuelo at a fiesta," she said, her eyes looking at something far away. "He was an artist, a dreamer with paint on his fingers." She pointed to the painting on the kitchen wall Leo had barely noticed, a vibrant splash of golden-orange flowers under a brilliant blue sky. "He painted that for me as a wedding gift. He said I was the sun in his sky." Leo looked at the painting, really looked at it. It wasn't just a decoration. It was a love letter in oil paint. He looked at his grandmother, humming as she stirred the mole. She wasn't just a sick old woman he was supposed to take care of. She was a whole love story, a living treasure chest of memories. The thought made his chest feel strangely tight. The spell was broken by the sharp click of high heels on the floor tiles. Tia Rosa appeared in the kitchen doorway, a too bright smile plastered on her face. "Ah, the famous mole. Smells wonderful, Mama." She air-kissed her mother, her eyes darting around the room, lingering on the simmering pot as if calculating its cost. She launched into a monologue about her own troubles, a problem with her car, a difficult client at the real estate office where she worked. Then, like a snake smoothly changing direction, she turned to Abuela, her voice dripping with false concern. "You look tired, Mama. All this cooking. You shouldn't strain yourself." She leaned in. "You know, to make things easier, you could just sign the house transfer papers now. I could manage everything for you, so you can just rest." Abuela didn't stop stirring. She simply shook her head, a small, firm movement. "My mind is still clear, Rosa. I am not tired." Rosa's smile tightened. She turned her gaze on Leo, who was awkwardly wiping the counter. Her eyes were like two cold stones. "And you, Leo," she said, her tone sweetly poisonous. "Such a young man. You must have your own life back in America, a career. Staying here too long, it could really set you back, ruin your prospects. It would be a shame." Her meaning was as clear as glass. "You don't belong here. Leave." Before Leo could form a single defensive word, Abuela Esperanza did something extraordinary. She lifted the wooden spoon from the pot, set it down quietly, and turned around. She walked over to Leo, her steps steady. She took his hand, the one still holding the dirty towel, in both of hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her skin warm and dry. Then she looked straight at her daughter, Rosa. Her voice was gentle, the way a mountain is gentle, because it is so solid and unshakable. "This house," Abuela said, each word clear and deliberate, "is Leo's home now. He is the one who is here with me. I have decided." The kitchen went utterly silent. The only sound was the soft plop, plop of the bubbling mole. Rosa's face changed. The polished mask cracked, revealing a flash of pure, furious shock underneath. Her perfectly made-up eyes widened, then narrowed into dangerous slits. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Leo stood frozen. He could feel the strong, sure pulse in his grandmother's hand wrapped around his. A loud, rhythmic thumping filled his ears. His own heart. This house is Leo's home now. The words echoed, not as a victory for his business plan, but as something deeper, scarier, and more wonderful. A belonging he hadn't asked for and didn't understand was being offered to him, fiercely and publicly. For the first time in his life, the words family and blood didn't feel like abstract concepts. They felt like the warm, firm hand holding his, and the icy, hate-filled stare from across the room. Rosa had just lost a major battle, and the look on her face promised that the war was far from over. Leo thought he was just taking his grandmother to visit some old friends. It turned out he was meeting a legend. Their first stop was a small, open-air workshop filled with the smell of clay and wood smoke. An old man with hands like twisted tree roots looked up from his pottery wheel, his face breaking into a huge gap-toothed smile. "Professora Esperanza, you honor my humble shop." "Professora?" Leo glanced at his grandmother. She was beaming, nodding at the intricate clay bowls on the shelves. The old potter, named Mateo, spoke to Leo in a conspiratorial whisper, while Abuela admired a glazed vase. "She taught my son to read when the school was far away. She helped us sell our pots to the city, so we didn't have to just farm. She is a guardian of our hands." The next visit was to a weaver, a woman whose home was a symphony of clacking looms and vibrant threads. "Ah, the professor!" she cried, embracing Abuela. She showed Leo a complex textile pattern. She found the old designs in books and taught them to us again. Before her, we were forgetting. Everywhere they went, it was the same. The candy maker, the herbalist, the baker. They all called her Professora. They brought her little gifts, a sweet, a sprig of rosemary, a warm bun, with a respect that was deeper than just fondness for a neighbor. She had been a teacher, a preserver, a quiet pillar holding up a whole world of tradition Leo had never known existed. The final stop was at a tiny house where an elderly couple lived. The husband, Don Hector, held Leo's hand in a grip that was still strong. His eyes were milky with cataracts, but they looked right at Leo. She raised that daughter, Rosa, all alone after her husband died. Worked her fingers to the bone to send her to university in the city. And what did she get? A daughter who visits with perfume and empty words, who left her here alone. He squeezed Leo's hand. You are her blessing. I see it. You came back." In the quiet of the old truck on the way home, Leo looked at the woman beside him. She was gazing out the window at the passing fields, her purple scarf bright against the dusty glass. He didn't see a sick old lady anymore. He didn't see a simple transaction. He saw a professor, a guardian, a force of nature who had poured her life into her community and her child. A flicker of awe, sharp and clean, cut through the fog of his own selfish plans. He was in the presence of someone truly great. Abuela broke the silence, her voice soft. Today's saying, mijo. El que no llora, no mama. The baby who doesn't cry doesn't get the milk. She turned to him. In this life, you must be brave enough to ask for your own happiness, to cry out for what you need. Leo pulled the leather diary from his bag. The carved flower on the cover felt familiar now. He wrote the saying down carefully. Ask for your own happiness. He thought about what he had been asking for since he arrived. It had only been money. The idea felt hollow and small now, sitting next to her vast, quiet life. A few days later, Leo went to the busy outdoor market alone to buy groceries. He was examining some avocados when a familiar, cloying perfume cut through the smells of fruit and spice. Leo, we need to talk. Tia Rosa stood there, but the polished, smiling aunt was gone. Her face was all hard lines and cold calculation. She gestured with her head towards a slightly quieter alley between stalls. Against his better judgment, Leo followed. Rosa didn't waste time. She crossed her arms, her expensive bracelets clinking. I know exactly why you're here, she said. Her voice low and flat. Debts. Jobless. A dead-end life up north. Did you think I wouldn't check? I have friends in the right places. Leo's stomach clenched, but he kept his face still. You're just another hungry dog coming late to the dinner table, she spat, the venom clear now. So don't pretend to be noble. Let's make a deal. You help me. You convince my mother that she's too sick, that she needs to sign the house over to me for management. She leaned in, and I'll make sure you get a cut. A nice, thick envelope of cash. More than you'd get from selling your sad little story to anyone else. From her sleek leather purse, she pulled out a thick white envelope. It was stuffed, the outline of bills clearly visible through the paper. She held it out, her eyes locked on his. It's better than nothing, right? Which is exactly what you'll get if you keep playing the loyal grandson. She'll change her mind, you'll see, and you'll be left with nothing. Leo stared at the envelope. It represented everything he had come for. An easy solution. A clean exit. Money in his hand, right now. He could almost feel the weight of it, the relief it would buy. But his mind didn't flash to his empty bank account. It flashed to Abuela's hands, patiently picking up spilled chiles. To her voice saying, the flavor of patience feeds the soul. To the look in Don Hector's cloudy eyes when he called Leo a blessing. To the heavy, beautiful weight of the leather diary in his room, slowly filling with her wisdom. He wasn't that person anymore. The hungry dog, the latecomer. Or, at least, he didn't want to be. He looked from the envelope to Rosa's expectant, arrogant face. A strange calm settled over him. He reached out, not to take the envelope, but to gently push her offering hand away. Tia Rosa, he said, and his voice was steady, almost peaceful. I came here for the money. That's true. He met her shocked gaze. But I'm staying for her. I'm sorry. For a second, Rosa just stood there, the envelope suspended in the air between them. Then her face drained of all color, turning a sickly pale green beneath her makeup. Her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. The cold fury in her eyes was hotter than any child's smoke. She didn't say another word. She shoved the envelope back into her purse, turned on her sharp heel, and stalked away, her footsteps snapping against the cobblestones. Leo stood alone in the alley, the sounds of the market swirling around him. His heart was pounding, but not with fear. With a kind of fierce, clear certainty. He had just turned down a stack of cash for a woman he'd known for a few weeks. He had officially chosen a side. And as he watched Rosa disappear into the crowd, he knew, with a cold drip of dread, that her next move wouldn't be a bribe. It would be a war. The house was quiet. Abuela was resting in her room, and Leo, feeling restless and wanting to be useful, decided to do some cleaning. He took a rag and began dusting the shelves in the living room, the ones cluttered with small ceramic animals and faded photographs. On the top shelf sat a simple wooden box, dark with age and smooth from years of handling. As he reached for it, his fingers fumbled. The box slipped, hit the edge of the shelf, and clattered to the floor, its lid popping open. Papers scattered across the worn rug. "Oh, great," Leo muttered, kneeling down. He began gathering them up, intending to put them back neatly. Some were old letters, the paper thin and yellowed, covered in elegant, looping Spanish handwriting. He caught a few words. Mi amor, mi sol. My love, my son. Love letters between his grandparents. A private world he shouldn't see. A pang of guilt hit him, and he quickly stacked them. Beneath them was another paper. Different. It was newer, crisper, typed. The word at the top made his breath catch. Testamento. Will. His hands went still. The only sound was the rustle of the paper in his suddenly shaky grip. He could hear his own heartbeat, a loud, fast thump, 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 in his ears, drowning out the quiet of the house. His eyes, against his will, scanned the lines, formal language, dates, signatures, and then one line, clear as a slap. Cedo la totalidad de mis bienes, incluida la propiedad en a la Fundación para la Preservación del Folclore de Oaxaca. I leave all my assets, including the property to the Foundation for the Preservation of Oaxacan Folklore. The date. 5 years ago. The world seemed to tilt. Leo sat down hard on the floor, the will and the love letters a meaningless pile in his lap. The wooden floor felt cold through his jeans. So that was it. The truth. She had never intended to give him the house. Not really. That grand speech in the kitchen, taking his hand, telling Rosa this was his home. It was all an act. A show. She was just using him. Using his desperation for a place to stay, his willingness to be a nurse, until she was gone and this foundation got everything. He was a convenient idiot. Rosa had been right all along. A hot, bitter wave of betrayal crashed over him. He felt stupid. So incredibly stupid for starting to believe, for starting to care. "You idiot," he whispered to the empty room, his voice thick with fury and hurt. "You fell for it." "Leo?" He froze. The voice came from the doorway. Abuela Esperanza stood there, one hand resting on the frame for support. Her eyes went from his face, pale and twisted with anger, down to the papers in his hands. They lingered on the typed will on top. Her expression didn't change, but the light in her dark eyes seemed to flicker, like a candle in a draft. The silence in the room was a heavy, suffocating thing. Leo pushed himself to his feet, the papers crumpling in his fist. He held the will up, the page shaking. You said this house was my home." The words burst out of him, shaky with a rage he couldn't control. Was that just another line? Another performance? Rosa was right, wasn't she? I'm just a useful fool. He saw her flinch, just a tiny movement, but it only fueled his pain. He felt exposed and foolish. Abuela didn't look away. She didn't get angry back. She took a slow, careful step into the room, then another. Her movements were gentle, as if approaching a scared animal. When she was close, she reached out, not for him, but for the paper in his hand. He let her take it. She held the 5-year-old will, looking at it not with guilt, but with a deep, sad tenderness. Then, without a word, she brought her hands together and tore it. A clean, sharp rip. She did it again and again, methodically, until the document was a handful of confetti. Leo could only stare, his anger stalled, replaced by shock. "I wrote that," she said, her voice a soft murmur, "when I was my most lonely. When Rosa had her new life in the city, and I thought no one needed this old woman any more. I thought my story was over." She let the fragments fall from her fingers, a little white snowfall onto the rug. "I wanted what was left of me to go to the stories of this place, to the folklore." She looked up at him, and her eyes were glistening with tears, but they shone with a warmth that melted the ice in his chest. "Then you came, and I changed. Leo, I knew you came for the house. A mother knows her child's heart, even a grandchild she has just met. I saw it in your eyes that first day, all hard and hungry." She took a step closer, her gaze holding his, seeing right through him. But I believed in what you did after. I believed in the words you wrote in your book. I believed in the mole sauce you didn't want to make but tried anyway. I believed in the way you listened to an old woman's stories." A small, tearful smile touched her lips. "Your heart. It found something more precious here, didn't it? Something it was looking for even when you didn't know." The last remnants of his fury didn't just vanish. They shattered, leaving behind a vast, empty space that was instantly flooded with a tidal wave of the most awful shame and regret he had ever felt. He had accused this woman, this legend who had given so much, of the very selfishness that lived in his own heart. A broken sound escaped his throat. The tears he'd been choking back burst free, hot and unstoppable. The papers fell from his hands as he stumbled forward. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, the words torn from somewhere deep and raw. He didn't just hug her. He clung to her, this small, frail pillar of strength, burying his face in her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Abuela, I'm sorry." Her thin arms came around him, holding him tight as he shook with tears. She didn't shush him. She just held him, her hand patting his back, absorbing his storm of guilt and grief. In that moment, the last wall around Leo's heart crumbled to dust. He wasn't here for a house anymore. He was here, finally and completely, for her. A change came over Abuela Esperanza. It wasn't sudden, but Leo noticed it every day. She moved slower, her steps more careful. She napped in her chair by the window for longer stretches, the afternoon sun painting her face in gold light. But her eyes, when they were open, burned with a fierce, gentle purpose. "It is nearly time," she said one morning, her voice thinner now, a soft rustle of paper. "For Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, I will teach you," she directed him as they cleared a small table by the window. This was not about sadness, she explained. It was about welcoming visitors, remembering, love that outlasts even death. Together they built the ofrenda, the offering table. Leo placed a faded photograph of his grandfather, a handsome man with a painter's smock and a kind smile. Abuela added his favorite things: a wooden cigar, a small glass of smoky mezcal, a sugary skull-shaped candy. She showed him how to bake pan de muerto, the bread of the dead, its top crusted with shapes that looked like bones and tears. "But the most important part," she said, her trembling hand pointing to an empty space on the table, was the flowers. "The cempasúchil," she whispered, the beautiful, rolling word full of reverence. "The marigold. It is the sun of the earth, its bright orange color and its strong scent. It is a path, a glowing road in the darkness for the souls to follow back home to us." She looked at Leo, her dark eyes serious. "Without the flowers, they can get lost." She said it with such certainty that Leo felt a chill, followed by a deep, aching understanding. He saw her gaze drift past him, out the window to a bare, empty patch of earth in her beloved garden, a place where, perhaps, flowers used to grow. Her eyes held a quiet worry, a fear not for herself, but for the ones she hoped to guide. That look settled in Leo's heart and would not leave. The next day, while she rested, he went to the market. Not for groceries, but on a mission. He went from stall to stall, asking the vendors, "Tiene semillas de cempasúchil? Do you have marigold seeds?" Most shook their heads. "Muy tarde," one old woman said. Too late in the season. But finally, at the very last stall at the edge of the market, a man selling medicinal herbs dug in a sack and pulled out a small, crumpled paper packet. "The last ones," he said. Leo took the packet as if it held gold dust. That afternoon, he worked the bare patch of earth in the garden. He broke up the soil, careful and quiet. He made neat little rows and, following the instructions on the packet, pressed the tiny, dark seeds into the warm ground. Every morning since, his first task was to water that small plot, whispering to the unseen seeds under the soil, willing them to grow. A secret hope planted in dirt. 2 weeks later, the Day of the Dead was drawing near. Abuela was too weak to walk far. One bright morning, Leo helped her into the old wheelchair they kept for long outings. "Let's get some sun, Abuela," he said softly. He pushed her through the kitchen door and into the garden, turning her not towards the blooming herbs, but towards the forgotten corner. For a moment she just looked. Then her breath caught a small, sharp intake of air. There, in the once empty earth, was a living fuzz of the brightest green. Hundreds of tiny marigold seedlings had pushed through the soil, standing straight in the sun, their baby leaves like little hopeful hands. Leo knelt in the dirt beside the wheelchair. He kept his voice low, as if sharing the most important secret in the world. "I'm growing you a path," he whispered, his finger gently touching a tender green shoot. "A path of flowers, so you and Abuelo will never be lost." Abuela Esperanza did not make a sound. She couldn't. Her hand, thin and light as a dried leaf, reached out and found Leo's where it rested on the chair. She gripped it with a strength that belied her frail body, her fingers tightening around his. When he looked up, he saw two silent tears tracing slow, glistening paths down her wrinkled cheeks. But her face was not sad. It was lit from within by a happiness so profound and peaceful it took Leo's breath away. She was looking at him, and at the green promise in the earth, and she was smiling the most beautiful, radiant smile he had ever seen. Gracias, she breathed, the word full of more love than any speech. Mi pequeño sol. My little son. The moment was shattered by the sharp, impatient rap of knuckles on the front door, followed by the sound of it opening without an invitation. Rosa strode in, but she was not alone. A man in a stiff, expensive suit followed her, carrying a briefcase. Rosa's eyes swept the room, landing on Leo and Abuela in the garden doorway. A cold, triumphant smirk played on her lips. Mother, Leo, this is Attorney Ruiz. She gestured to the man, who gave a curt, impersonal nod. Rosa pulled a document from a fancy leather folder. We have some concerns. About your capacity, Mama. Your clarity. This paper, signed by you, grants me power of attorney to manage your assets. For your own good, of course. She held it out. The signature at the bottom was a shaky, faint scrawl that looked nothing like Abuela's firm hand. Leo felt a hot jolt of fury. It was a lie. A cruel, greedy lie. Abuela looked at the paper, then at her daughter. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear as mountain water. She opened her mouth to speak, but a wave of exhaustion seemed to pass over her. Leo stepped forward. He placed himself gently but firmly between the wheelchair and his aunt. He wasn't the desperate, calculating man who had arrived months ago. He stood straight, his voice low and steady, filled with a protective certainty he didn't know he possessed. She is more clear-minded than anyone in this room, he said, his gaze locking with Rosa's, and I will not let anyone disturb her, not today, not ever again. He walked to the front door and held it open, his posture leaving no room for argument. You need to leave, now. Rosa's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of icy rage. Attorney Ruiz looked uncomfortable, adjusting his tie. For a second, it seemed she might argue. But Leo's unwavering stance was a wall she couldn't charm or bully through. This isn't over, she hissed, shoving the paper back into her folder. She turned on her heel, the lawyer scurrying after her, and disappeared into the street. Leo closed the door softly, the click of the latch sounding final. He turned back to the quiet, sun-filled room and his grandmother. The legal war was now at their doorstep, but his only thought was guarding the fragile peace inside, and the little green shoots waiting in the garden sun. The light in the little blue house grew softer, quieter. Abuela Esperanza spent most of her time in bed now, propped up on pillows that seemed to swallow her frail frame. But her spirit, that inner sun, had not dimmed. One evening, as the sky outside turned the color of bruised plums, she turned her head on the pillow. "Leo," she whispered, her voice a dry leaf stirred by a gentle wind. "Come here, mi sol." He pulled the wooden chair close to her bedside and took her hand. It felt so light, like holding a baby bird. With a slow, deliberate movement, She reached under her pillow with her other hand. She brought out two things and placed them carefully on the blanket between them. The first was a single, old-fashioned key made of tarnished brass, warm from her touch. The second was the leather-bound diary, the one with the carved flower on the cover. It looked thicker, fuller. "The house?" she said, her dark eyes holding his, clear and certain. "It is yours. I changed the will, the official one, because you gave me the most precious gift at the end of my days, your true time, and a heart that learned how to love." Leo looked from the key to the diary, a lump forming in his throat so large he couldn't speak. She nudged the diary towards him. He opened it. The first half was filled with his own clumsy handwriting, the sayings, the recipes, his notes. But at the back, in the last dozen pages, was a different script. It was spidery and slanted, written in Spanish with a fading pen. Her words. She had been writing in it, too. "Now listen," she said, her voice gaining a thread of her old teacher's strength. "Keep the traditions. The ofrenda. Care for the garden, the little seedlings. They will need you. Open your heart to the community. They are your family now, too." She paused, gathering her breath. "And one more thing, my little son. Never say adios. Never goodbye." A faint, beautiful smile touched her lips. "Always say hasta pronto. See you soon. Because love, it never disappears. It just changes its shape." She closed her eyes then, but the smile remained, peaceful and complete. Her breathing grew slower, shallower, like a gentle tide going out. Leo held her hand, his own tears falling silently onto their joined fingers. He didn't speak. He just poured all his love, all his gratitude into that quiet touch. He felt the exact moment her breath sighed out for the last time, soft as a whisper. The room was profoundly still. The only sounds were his own choked sob, and in the distance the deep, mournful toll of the church bell marking the hour. She was gone, and she had taken a piece of the sun with her. That night the house felt like a giant empty shell. Leo sat at the kitchen table, the old brass key and the diary before him. He couldn't bear to look at her empty room. He opened the diary again, to her writing at the back. His Spanish was still basic, but he could understand her clear, loving script. He began to read her final letter. "Para mi pequeño sol, to my little son. I know everything. I know about Rosa, my daughter. I know she came to you in the market and tried to buy you with money. I know she brought a lawyer to try to trick me when I was weak. She only ever wanted the money. But you, my Leo, you chose to stay with me. You chose love. You passed the biggest test of the heart. Be strong now. The road will not always be easy. And remember to plant many, many cempasúchil flowers. You will understand why. Te quiero con todo mi corazón. Tu abuela Esperanza. I love you with all my heart. Your grandma Esperanza." Leo's breath left his body. The paper blurred before his eyes. She knew. She had known about Rosa's bribes, about the fake documents, about every cruel scheme. She hadn't been a weak, dying woman being taken advantage of. She had been a wise, powerful queen on her throne, watching everything, guiding him, teaching him, loving him through it all. Her silence hadn't been ignorance. It had been supreme patience and faith. Faith that he would find his way to the right choice. A raw, guttural cry tore from his throat. He dropped his head onto the open pages of the diary, his shoulders shaking with the force of his tears. They weren't quiet tears anymore. They were a storm of awe, grief, and overwhelming love. Abuela. He wept into the soft leather, the word a prayer and a cry. Oh, abuela. She had seen the hungry, selfish man who arrived, and she had loved him anyway. She had watched him struggle, fail, and slowly change, and she had loved him more. And in the end, with her final, stunning secret, she had handed him not just a house and a key, but the breathtaking, terrible, beautiful truth. That he was seen, he was known, and he was loved beyond measure. The teacher had given her final, most profound lesson, and her student was left both shattered and whole, holding the proof of it in his trembling hands. A few days after the quiet, flower-filled funeral, they came. Leo was in the garden, watering the tiny marigold seedlings, when he heard the angry click of heels on the cobblestones. He looked up to see Rosa marching into the yard. She wasn't alone. The stiff-suited lawyer from before was at her elbow, and two well-dressed strangers, distant cousins Leo had never met, flanked her, their faces stern and disapproving. Rosa stopped a few feet from him, her chin held high. The grief of the funeral was gone from her face, replaced by a cold, theatrical outrage. "There he is," she announced, her voice loud enough for the whole alley to hear. "The fraud, the opportunist who took advantage of a sick old woman to steal her property." She turned to the lawyer and the cousins. "We are here to demand that the courts throw out this fake will he tricked her into signing." Leo stood up slowly, wiping his damp hands on his jeans. His heart ached, a sharp, fresh pain cutting through the numbness of his loss. He felt terribly alone, a single figure facing a wall of hostile faces in the garden Abuela had loved. But his feet remained planted in the soft earth. He would not run. Before he could even form a word, a new sound came from the gate, a soft creak, followed by the shuffle of many feet. Mateo, the old potter, walked in first, his clay-dusted hands held stiffly at his sides. Behind him came the weaver woman, then the baker, the candlemaker, and the herbalist, Doña Carmen from next door, Don Hector guided by his wife. More than a dozen of Abuela's friends, her community, filed silently into the small yard. They didn't say anything. They just moved to stand behind Leo, a quiet, solid wall of wrinkled faces and steady eyes. Rosa's confidence flickered for a second. "What is this?" she sneered. "A gathering of the hopeless." At that moment, the front door of the little blue house opened, and the familiar, kind-faced lawyer, Señor Rivera, stepped out. He held a formal-looking document in his hands. He gave Leo a small, respectful nod, then addressed the group. "The last will and testament of Esperanza Gonzalez," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Witnessed by myself and a notary, dated after Mr. Leo's arrival, and leaving the entirety of her estate, including this house, to her grandson, Leonardo Gonzalez. It is entirely legal and binding." Rosa's face flushed a dark red. "They're all lying for him," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the crowd behind Leo. "He's paid them off. They're poor. They'll say anything for a few pesos. A gasp went through the group of elders. Then Doña Carmen, the tiny neighbor woman, stepped forward. Her voice was thin and shaky with age, but it cut through the air like a knife. "Rosa Gonzalez!" she cried, her fingers shaking as she pointed it at the younger woman. "Do you know who stayed up all night massaging your mother's feet when the pain was so bad she couldn't sleep? Leo. Do you know who ran all over town to find the special herbs for her tea? Leo." The old woman's eyes blazed with a righteous fury. "And you? You showed up with papers and perfume? I heard you. With my own ears, through the window, I heard you on the phone. You called your own mother a stubborn old relic when she wouldn't sign your papers." Rosa took a step back as if struck. You're a crazy old woman." Then Mateo the Potter spoke up. He pulled a small, old digital recorder from his pocket. "The professor gave this to me for safekeeping," he said, his voice gravelly. He pressed a button. A voice, sharp and cruel, spilled into the sunny garden. It was Rosa's voice. "Mama, you're being ridiculous. Just sign it. You're too old and sick to understand business. That American loser is just using you, and you're too senile to see it." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was absolute. Rosa's lawyer cleared his throat, his face pale with embarrassment. He muttered, I cannot be a part of this," snapped his briefcase shut, and hurried out of the gate without looking back. The two distant cousins exchanged ashamed glances, shook their heads at Rosa, and silently followed him out. Rosa was left utterly alone in the middle of the garden, surrounded by the accusing eyes of the community. All her polish, her perfumed armor, was gone. She looked small and exposed. Her whole body trembled. She looked at Leo, and her face twisted with a bitter, defeated rage. "You win," she spat, the words tasting like ash. Leo looked at her. He felt no triumph, only a deep, overwhelming sadness for the woman who had thrown away a treasure for a pile of stones. He looked at the marigold sprouts at his feet, then back at his aunt. "I didn't win anything," he said softly. "I just accepted what she wanted to give me. A home." He paused, his voice full of a quiet sorrow. "But you, Dia, you lost the most precious thing. You lost a mother." For the first time, Rosa's hard eyes truly broke. Not with anger, but with a pain so raw and sudden it crumpled her face. A strangled sob escaped her. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand, turned, and stumbled out of the garden, her expensive heels catching on the cobblestones as she fled. Leo stood still, surrounded by the gentle, firm presence of his new family. The battle was over. Justice hadn't come from a courtroom, but from the quiet, unshakable truth of a community's love and the memory of a wise woman who had known exactly what she was doing, right until the very end. The first day of the dead without her dawned clear and bright. Leo was up before the sun, moving through the quiet house with a purpose that pushed back the ache of her absence. He set up the ofrenda table with more care than ever before. He placed the photographs. One of his smiling grandfather in his painter's smock, and the new one he had added, a picture of Abuela Esperanza in her garden, her face turned to the sun, laughing. He set out a glass of water, his grandfather's favorite cigar, and the small bottle of mezcal. Then, with a nervous pride, he added a clay bowl of mole sauce. It wasn't perfect, A little too bitter, maybe, but he had made it himself, remembering her patient hands guiding his. Next to the bowl, he placed the leather diary, now the most precious book he owned, its pages full of her wisdom and his journey. Finally, he went into the garden. The morning light touched the small patch of earth he had tended for weeks, and there they were. Not a full carpet yet, but a dozen brave, brilliant suns had opened overnight. The cempasúchil flowers. Their petals were a vibrant, impossible orange gold, like captured sunlight. He carefully cut the very first blooms, their spicy, earthy scent filling his hands. He arranged the marigolds on the ofrenda, their golden heads nodding among the candles and offerings. The table was ready. It was beautiful. He had invited everyone: Mateo, the potter, the weavers, the baker, Doña Carmen, Don Hector and his wife, the whole family of her heart. As the afternoon ray slanted through the windows, they began to arrive, carrying plates of food and quiet smiles. They hugged Leo, their eyes soft with shared loss. Then, one by one, they noticed the garden. Mateo stopped in his tracks, staring at the small, glorious patch of gold. Dios mío, he breathed, his rough hand coming up to his heart. Leo. She would be so proud. Look at them. They're magnificent. Leo smiled, a true smile that reached his eyes. He picked up a small basket. They are, he said, and they have a job to do. He began to work. He started at the gate of the little front yard. Gently, reverently, he plucked the vibrant petals from the stems, handfuls of gold. He knelt and began to scatter them. He created a path. A glowing, golden trail of petals along the cobblestone walkway, up the single step, across the threshold of the blue house, through the living room, right up to the base of the ofrenda table itself. The room fell silent, watching. The path shimmered in the candlelight, a river of light leading from the outside world straight to the altar of memory. As he placed the last handful of petals, Leo leaned close to the photograph of his grandmother and whispered, his voice thick with love. I have the flowers, Abuela. I made the brightest path I could. You and Abuelo, remember the way home, okay? That broke the solemn silence in the best way. Someone chuckled through tears. Someone else began telling a story about the time Esperanza tried to teach a whole class to dance at a fiesta and tripped over her own skirt. The room filled with noise, the good kind. Stories, laughter, the clink of glasses, the sharing of food. It wasn't a sad vigil. It was a fiesta for the soul, just as she had taught him. The house was alive, buzzing with love and life and memory. Late that night, after the last friend had hugged him good night and shuffled out into the starry street, Leo was alone. The house was quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet, full of echoes of laughter and the warm, spicy scent of marigolds and candle wax. He sat on the floor in front of the ofrenda, watching the candle flames dance. The golden path of petals glowed softly in the dim light. A gentle breeze, sudden and sweet, sighed through the open window. The candle flames dipped and swayed. The scent of the cempasúchil blossoms swelled, filling the air so completely it was like breathing in sunlight itself. Leo closed his eyes, breathing in that golden scent. And then he felt it. A sensation, clear and warm as truth. It was the light, tender touch of a hand, brushing softly against his cheek. It was a touch he knew in his bones. He didn't open his eyes. A smile spread across his face, so wide it hurt, and tears of pure, joyful peace spilled from beneath his closed eyelids. "Hasta pronto, abuela," he whispered into the fragrant, loving dark. "See you soon." A full year had woven its way through the little blue house. It was still the same house, but it breathed differently now. Leo had fixed the creaky step and repainted the window frames, but Abuela's things remained exactly where she loved them. Her favorite chair by the window, her collection of clay figurines, the painting of the golden flowers. He had turned the small, spare room into something new. He called it Esperanza's Corner. On shelves sat Mateo's pottery and the weaver's vibrant cloth. On Wednesday evenings, the room filled with the hesitant, cheerful voices of a few curious tourists and younger locals as Leo taught basic Spanish phrases and the simple recipes Abuela had taught him. The leather diary now had a second volume, filled with new sayings he'd learned, notes from his classes and pressed cempasúchil petals. One afternoon, a young woman with thoughtful eyes lingered after a cooking lesson. She was a visitor from California, she said, her own grandparents from Jalisco. She looked around the cozy, memory-filled room, her eyes misty. "Why do you do all this?" she asked softly. "It's so much work." Leo smiled. His gaze drifted past her, out the window to the backyard, where a whole sea of golden-orange marigolds now blazed in the sun, 10 times more than that first brave dozen. "Because I made a promise to a son," he said simply, "that I would try to become a little son, too." The front door, painted a fresh, cheerful blue, creaked open a few days later. Leo looked up from repotting a basil plant. Rosa stood there. She looked like a faded photograph of her former self. The sharp pantsuit was gone, replaced with simple, worn clothes. Her face was bare of its heavy makeup, pale and tired. The cloud of expensive perfume was absent. She looked small and utterly weary. "Leo," she said, her voice rough as if from disuse. She didn't step all the way in. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve that." She swallowed, her eyes fixed on the floor near his feet. "But I wanted to say I'm sorry. To her, and to you." From the pocket of her plain jacket, she pulled out a small yellowed paper packet, folded and refolded many times. She held it out with a trembling hand. These were hers. She gave them to me years ago, told me to plant something beautiful. Rosa's voice cracked. "I just kept them. I think they belong here now." Leo looked at the packet, then at his aunt's ravaged face. He saw no strategy there now, only a raw, painful regret. He wiped his earthy hands on his pants and walked over. He took the packet gently. The paper was soft with age. He could feel the tiny, precious shapes of seeds inside. He nodded once, a slow, accepting movement. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet. Better late than never. The following year, as the air turned crisp and the scent of smoke and sugar began to drift through Oaxaca, the little house buzzed with life in a way it hadn't since Abuela's last days. It was the afternoon before Dia de los Muertos. Laughter spilled from the kitchen where Leo and Sophia, the visitor from California, who had kept coming back and was now a dear friend, were wrestling with a giant batch of pan de muerto dough. In the living room, Mateo and Doña Carmen were carefully placing photos on the expansive ofrenda, which now held pictures of several departed community elders. And in a quiet corner, Rosa, her hands less steady but her face more peaceful, was stringing delicate paper marigolds, contributing in her own hesitant way. Leo stepped outside into the golden light of the backyard. The garden was a symphony of orange and gold. The marigolds from Abuela's saved seeds had joined his own, creating a blazing, glorious field of tiny suns. He picked up the watering can and tended to them, the soil dark and rich. He looked up at the clear, warm sky, a smile touching his lips, a feeling of profound peace settling in his chest. In his mind, he spoke to the sun above and the one living forever in his heart. She taught me that love isn't something you keep locked away. It's something you give away. He watched a breeze stir the golden blooms, sending a shower of petals dancing. And I'm giving it away, Abuela, with all the heart of your little son. The camera of memory would fade on that image. Leo in his garden of light, the house behind him full of life and love, and a single, brilliant marigold petal caught in a sunbeam, floating gently on the warm, carrying air.
That's the end of the story today. So, the most expensive currency isn't dollars, but the time and love you choose to invest in another soul. Leo didn't buy a house, he earned a home by finally learning what real value looks like. What's the priceless memory you have with your parents? Please comment below, subscribe and hit the bell for more interesting stories like this. Thank you for your watching.